curate your life, everything about your life, right? Everything that you ingest, whether it's what you listen to, what you talk about with people, what you watch, what you read. Be very, very choosy about who and what receives your energy because your energy is precious and not everyone and everything deserves it. So that's a form of self-preservation.
You are listening to the Pinnacle Podcast, where we empower women in medicine through education, community, and actionable strategies for both the practice and the business of medicine.
Medicine is a lifelong career, and continuing education is crucial for professional development. Pinnacle is the first and only multi-specialty organization dedicated to addressing the challenges that all women in healthcare face.
Welcome to Pinnacle, the elite professional community providing education for women in medicine. At Pinnacle, we challenge you to pave your own path by helping you develop the skills needed to not only stay in medicine, but to excel. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Pinnacle Prescription Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Rupa Wong, and today I'm joined by Dr. Deepti Gandhi for Menopause Matters, Top Tips for Being Prepared for Menopause. Dr. Gandhi is a family medicine board-certified physician and is also certified by the Menopause Society as a Menopause Society practitioner. She is, in addition, a certified physician coach, and she has witnessed patient experiences with debilitating symptoms of perimenopause and menopause, and so she is eager to educate and empower us. This is a conversation very critical to me. As I've mentioned before in previous podcasts, I am perimenopausal at the age of 48, so I cannot wait to get started with this conversation. Thank you so much, Deepti, for joining us today.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here with you and your community.
Amazing. So let's just dive in. What drew you to focus on menopause management in your practice, and why is this area so important to you?
Well, before we launch into that, I first of all want to share with you that I'm also 48 and I'm in perimenopause as well. So
Yes.
just want to make sure everyone we know we are together in this. I will just share with you also, I've been practicing for 20 years, right, in family medicine. And probably the last 7 or 8 years of my practice, I kind of really focused on women's health. I even did a little bit of aesthetics. And I started having my patients complain to me about perimenopausal symptoms. They were struggling. And I will just share, since I started practicing 20 years ago, this was after that WHI study of 2002. So just a little bit of background. That was the Women's Health Initiative. And it was that study that we kind of went off of HRT because of that study. It was that study that basically scared doctors and patients into, thinking that estrogen was dangerous, it was poison, it was going to give you breast cancer and a heart attack and a stroke, and we should get everyone off of it. And, of course, all of us in primary care just listened, of course, and thought, oh my goodness, let's stop. And mind you, we had been prescribing HRT probably since the 1940s. Right. So this had been many decades of that treatment modality. That being said, that because of that study, it actually really put a pause on a lot of women's research and studies on women's health. And so what's interesting is most of everything in that study has since been walked back. Right. We now know that there was many flaws in that study. It was misinterpreted. And so we're kind of playing catch up, to be honest with you. Luckily, we have enough information science and research to know that, that study, again, was flawed. And when you know better, you do better. Right. So going back to my situation, I just thought, I always thought that, this didn't make complete sense to me that, estrogen was poison. I mean, your very ovaries that, started making these hormones, and that's how you started having periods and ovulating. How could they be making poison? It just didn't make sense. And then if you think about, women when they're pregnant, right? Our estrogen levels, for example, are hundreds of times higher than they are kind of even at baseline in someone who's pre-menopausal. And all these bad things, thank goodness, aren't happening, right? So just kind of common sense it didn't make a lot of sense. Now, me being a physician like all of us, medical provider like all of us, we're busy. We belong to lots of boards and organizations that we pay money to and, certify with. And, we rely on these bodies to supply us with what we hope is the most relevant latest research and information. And most of those bodies and organizations haven't been teaching us much of anything at all about the changes that happen to a woman when her ovaries start retiring, for lack of a better word,
I
right?
like that word, retiring.
Right? Yes. And I think I heard Dr. Mary Claire Haver use that word, and I thought that was really, really intelligent, and she's amazing. So, anyhow, so like I said, so there I was, and I thought, I just don't know enough, right? And in medicine, when we feel that we don't know enough about something, we call up a colleague, right?
Hmm.
Or we refer, right? And me in primary care. So I just thought, okay, hey, it's probably just me. I really want to give my patient excellent care, safe care. Let me refer her to a gynecologist. Not always, didn't really
Yeah.
help. How about an endocrinologist? They're a hormone expert. Hey, this will be great. Mm, not for these hormones. And again, no shade to any colleagues, right? None of us have been taught
Yeah.
about this. None of us, right? I mean, we know that this change will affect your eye health,
Hmm.
right? And I mean, and Dr. Wong, you can tell us like was how much time was spent on, the effects of, decreasing estrogen levels on a person's right?
Zero.
Yeah, right? 0, and not much for me either, right? And when I talk to my gynecologist colleagues and my endocrinologist colleagues and just my colleagues in general, we're all looking at each other like, "Hey, we really didn't learn much,"
Yeah.
And we have to remember, that 51% of our population has ovaries, right? So that means 100% of that 51% is going to go through this transition, right? Now, whether that person is miserable with outward obvious symptoms or their body is just going to have the cellular changes, which we all are going to have, you know, everyone is different. That being said, it's really about thinking about what is the impact going to be on their health span,
Mhm.
right? Because if we think the average age of menopause is 51 in this country, right?
Mhm.
And we know the symptoms now can start like 7 to 10 years before, right? So if the age range is like 45 to 55, it means that you can start having subtle changes. Maybe they're not awful, in your late 30s, right? And I think so many, providers as well as patients with ovaries just think, "Oh, but I still have my period," right? We just are so lacking in education, and that's really been a big issue, right?
Yeah.
So back to my story, I thought, "Okay, what do I do now?" I'm referring my patients, they're not getting any help. There's this lack of education. I feel like I don't know anything. And by I'm noticing like, wow, there's, all these people with these vitamins, or different, treatments for this time of life. And, I'm looking at the bottle because my patients are like, hey, should I take this? And I'm like, well, it has B vitamins. Those are great. But I'm not sure that that's really going to solve a problem when it is related to an estrogen deficiency. And I just got so frustrated because my patients would keep asking me, "Can you help me? Can you just do something?" I felt so inadequate
Mhm.
that I just started studying everything on my own. I started looking at research and articles, and I signed up for courses on my own, time and money. And it led to me going for the certification through the Menopause Society. And so here I am. And actually, last year I gave up my practice, and all I do is midlife women's health and hormone health. And that's kind of my story is I needed to be a part of the change.
Amazing. And it's wonderful that you can then educate other women because sometimes, like you mentioned, it's not available when you just go to see your physician, whether it's your
Right.
internist or your OBGYN or even an endocrinologist if you happen to have one. So I really love that you are enabling women to feel empowered with the changes that their body is going through. So you
Absolutely. Thank you.
emphasize that, and I know by giving them that knowledge to navigate menopause, it's so helpful. Can you share maybe a couple key pieces of information or strategies that you find most effective in educating your patients?
Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking about that. I think the number one recommendation I would have is educate yourself because knowledge is power. And as I was sharing with you, because in the medical field, we ourselves have not been given that education and therefore we haven't been able to give it to our patients. So again, no shade on anyone, on that. It is no one's fault. It's just something that needs to change. And I was that way as well. I just decided that I wanted to go in this direction. But what I would say is, refer to a menopause specialist, no problem. But going back to, women in general, I think the first key is to educate yourself, right? And so there's just, we have so much information, right? Like so much information. The minute you look up, something related to hormones or menopause, the algorithm on your social media sites is going to just start popping ads at you, right? For this, that, and the other. So what I would say is, discern and be very careful about who you're following, what you're reading and watching. Really go for science-based information would be my recommendation. There's a few great resources. For example, one wonderful book, amazing book, is called Estrogen Matters by Dr. Abram Blooming. And there's so many amazing books out there by physicians and medical providers in this space right now that are best selling, that are really incredible. They're educational, they're empowering, and so I would kind of start with those. That piece is like really educating yourself, and then the second piece and nugget I would offer is to really think about your mindset. So if you are navigating these changes, mindset is going to be key. And I spend time talking about that with each one of my patients because these symptoms can really make a person miserable. You know, it, you know, some of the symptoms are just so debilitating that people want to quit their jobs. They withdraw from, social activities. They become depressed. They are just absolutely miserable. They don't recognize themselves. The things that people tell me is just heartbreaking. And so what I really like to share with women is like, listen, these symptoms are terrible, but they are there to get your attention, to tell you something. Instead of us thinking, hey, this is going to be doom and gloom, maybe it's an opportunity to shift in a space of reprioritizing ourselves. Finally, after years, right? I mean, most of the time, not always, most of the time, women whether or not their mothers are kind of the nurturers in the family, the shock absorbers. They have tabs open on every single person in the family. They have, the dog's schedule down on their calendar, the vet appointments. I mean, they are multitasking machines. And it's because we are biologically primed and socially conditioned to do so, right? And I'm not saying that men don't always share these roles and that they shouldn't. Of course not. I'm just talking about what I see to be the case most of the time, right? So these symptoms, they just grab your attention. There's no choice. Like you have to face them. And so, I tell my patients and I remind myself, like, this is our opportunity to shift into version 2.0 of ourselves. We're not going back, right? We can't. We are forever changed. Um, Now, what that means is that we have to have a new approach, a new toolbox approach, right? And so I always tell people so the most frustrating part is that the old ways of doing and being don't seem to work anymore. And I think mourning that, being appropriately angry and frustrated and sad about it is your right. Absolutely get it out. You really need to give yourself space for that. And then once, you've felt those feelings or you have friends or a community where you can share that with and vent about it, there needs to be this acceptance, and kind of non-resistance of like, but I want to go back, but I want to go back to be able to working out the way I did and eating the way I did and feeling and looking the way I did. It's not happening. Even if you were the most healthy person in the world, I have to tell you, because every single cell in your body has an estrogen receptor. So single cell in your body and every organ system is going to feel that decline and that deficiency. Your body has been used to having these hormones since you first got your period. So it's going to be a big shift, right? And so that's the mindset piece that I really like people to sit with. And so I actually prescribe 7 wellness tools to my patients and go over it in my practice, and I send it to them. I tell them, please try to do one of these a day once you're feeling better with our, treatment strategies.
I love that. And that's such an important part of not just accepting or having that discussion about estrogen versus not, but also the mindset as you approach it. But even just going backwards a little bit, because some of our audience is
Sure.
not there. They are not our age. This is not even on their radar. They might not have remembered what they learned in school about menopause. So let's just get kind of nitty gritty in terms of the symptoms and what you see as popular misconceptions amongst patients or amongst the colleagues that you coach regarding how the symptoms will affect them. I mean, to be honest, when my internist first started bringing it up with me at our last, she looked at, I had a hysterectomy, so I can't track my periods. And she was looking at my hormone level. She's like, we need to start discussing, you need to start researching, you have to start thinking about this. And I was kind of like, wait, why do I have to start thinking about this? I'm not menopausal yet. I know that's years down the road. So
Right.
let's
Not
just
me.
even get to some of the nitty gritty of the symptoms and misconceptions that you find.
All right. I mean, I think that's such a great question, Rupa. So, I think the key is to be aware of your cycles, what sort of symptoms you are having, keep track of those things. And if you start noticing changes where you don't feel like yourself, you feel like something's off, believe yourself, because you've been in your body probably for 3 to 4 or more decades by the time you're starting to feel this. So you know the difference between it being stress or too much on your plate. So I would just say to believe in yourself, don't gaslight yourself,
Yes.
find a provider, right, that will listen to you. If you think it's hormonally related, a great resource is www.menopause.org, where you will find certified menopause specialists like myself in your local area so that you can ask them questions. And you may or may not need to do anything differently, but at least you are educated and empowered from, a source that is looking at the science and latest research.
Yes. I love that because, like we said, not everyone is staying abreast of the latest research or even what to
Absolutely.
offer. So, shifting just a bit, I know that you do coaching. How do you help your colleagues in healthcare align their career goals with their personal lives, especially those dealing with their own menopausal changes?
Oh, that's such a great question. It's so interesting that you asked me that right now. I actually am launching a group coaching program called Midlife Mindset Mastery that's going to start in September, because I feel like so many of us, as we approach midlife, these little whispers and questions start to come to us, like about our career and are we where we wanted to be?
Mhm.
And how interesting that the way, life is set up is that these, hormonal changes happen as well, right? I mean, there's
Yes,
a reason they call it the quote midlife crisis, right? Now, hey, that
exactly.
happens to men as well. They
Right.
don't quite have anything that's like the menopause transition like we do, but there's something about just in general being in midlife, right?
Mhm.
Midlife, you're kind of in this squeeze where you worry about people that depend on you, like your kids. Some people have grandkids. People are worrying about their parents. They're now noticing health changes in themselves, and they notice that they're not firing on all cylinders, or they're just so aware of like, hey, got a couple more decades here. Where am I where I wanted to be, right? I mean, career wise, just human being wise. Have I done some things on my bucket list? So it's such a critical, pivotal, and honestly just kind of an amazing time, where you can really pause and be curious about yourself and your life. And so I really love working with people kind of in this stage, because there's still so much that they want to do and see. And for me, it's all about sort of, shifting you from thinking about what you want to creating a life that you deserve and desire.
That's so amazing because I've always said, there's those 40 under 40 lists. I think there should be a 40 over 40. I think it's more amazing to accomplish something, start something new after the age of 40. It's a lot scarier. You are usually then leaving something, and I think then doing that amidst a lot of the hormonal changes that are occurring for many of us at that time period, learning about them, understanding what's happening even neurologically, as we were mentioning, the brain fog
Yes.
that can occur,
Yes,
right? So many, the fatigue,
absolutely.
the lack of sleep at night. Didn't get a good night's sleep last night, right? All
Mhm.
of those things that then also affect your professional life. So I love that you have a group centered on kind of bridging those and creating a cohesive way forward is awesome. What
Thank you.
advances do you see in the field in the future? What do you wanna see? What do you think is coming down the pipe to just have women's health just be more at the forefront for us to support women more in menopause management?
You know, I just really see Rupa. I see Gen X not having this.
Ah,
Gen X is like, no, I'm sorry, I cannot do this like our mothers did. And our poor mothers and the generation before them didn't even get all this information
right?
and these options, right? So I feel like Gen X is not having it. That's what I see, especially because I'm Gen X and I see a lot of Gen X in my practice. And all of us are like, no, this has got to stop. That we've got to do things better. And I look at our future generations and I think, wow, we owe them,
Mhm.
we have a responsibility. And I want this to be better for them. I want, as you were saying, for people who are not quite in this phase of life to have some, signs to look for,
Mhm.
right? So they feel prepared. And I really hope that as we're getting louder and louder about this phase of life, because it impacts the rest of our life, uh, you know, we are going to see more education, in the college level, in
Mm.
the medical school level, right? In graduate school studies, and of course, in residency and further training. I think that movement has already started.
Yes. Agree, agree, yes.
Baby steps,
Baby steps, and I love seeing all these bestsellers that on the New York
right?
Times list about this subject, which was more or less taboo 30 years ago, right? It was not at the forefront the way that it
Absolutely.
is, so I think that's a great start, the education standpoint. Alright, we are getting close to our end of time together. What is one pinnacle pearl that you would want to share with other women in medicine?
I love the word curate. you know and so my pearl often on podcasts is to curate your life, everything about your life, right? Everything that you ingest, whether it's what you listen to, what you talk about with people, what you watch, what you read. Be very, very choosy about who and what receives your energy, because your energy is precious. And, not everyone and everything deserves it. So that's a form of self-preservation. And I think especially in this era, right, where there's just a plethora of information and you're just in a sea, like, trying to find it, just like when we see patients and, they're like, what should I, believe, doctor? What should I read? Like I heard this and my friend said that, and then I looked it up and we're like, okay, here. And we try to, make it a little bit easy for them because we've already been through and embedded the information. So I think just curating every part of your life, whether it's, what's going on at work, what's going on with you socially, because you deserve it.
Such a great way to end the episode. Can you share with our listeners where they can find you?
Oh, absolutely. On Instagram, if you want to follow my medical practice, I'm at Soleil_wellness, and the Soleil is Soleil. And if you want to kind of find me regarding my mindset account, that's Dr. Gandhi_wellness. And then my website is www.drgandhiwellness.com.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Gandhi,
Thank
for
you.
joining us
Thank you.
today. I learned a lot, and I'm sure our listeners did too.
Such a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Pinnacle Podcast, where we strive to elevate the voices of women in medicine and inspire excellence across the healthcare landscape. Until next time, keep reaching for your pinnacle.